Eldridge Cleaver, the Black Panther leader who fled to Cuba to avoid being returned to jail, arrived in Algeria today to attend a Pan-African cultural festival in Algiers.
FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover today asserted that of the black extremist groups, the Black Panthers represent the greatest internal threat to the nation. In his report for fiscal year 1969, Hoover said the Panthers have perpetrated numerous assaults on police and have engaged in violent confrontations throughout the country.
You might murder a freedom fighter like Bobby Hutton, but you can't murder freedom fighting. And if you do, you come up with answers that don't answer, explanations that don't explain. You come up with conclusions that don't conclude.
Fred Hampton, who, by the way, I would look at as one of the true leaders of the Panthers.
Extraordinarily talented. 21 years old. Articulate. Watch some of his films. Hear him speak. Here was a dangerous man. He could persuade people that there was injustice. That the United States ought to be changed.
Black people need some peace. White people need some peace. And we are going to have to fight. We're going to have to struggle. We're going to have to struggle relentlessly to bring about some peace, because the people that we're asking for peace, they're a bunch of megalomaniac warmongers, and they don't even understand what peace means.
He was the heart and soul of the Chicago chapter of the Black Panther Party. And just an awesome motivator.
We hate the oppressor, whether he be white, black, brown, or yellow.
And he began to forge coalitions between various street gangs or youth organizations in Chicago. And by doing that, and by being a charismatic leader and being one who could mobilize the people, particularly the youth, he became noticed by the federal government.
We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips that I am a revolutionary. And you're going to have to keep on saying that.
The FBI never personally killed any Panthers. They always had local police departments do their dirty work. And they began to devise a scheme that culminated in his assassination while he was asleep, drugged by his security officer, who was also a police informant.
City police in Chicago murdered Fred Hampton.
It had happened apparently about 4 o'clock in the morning on December 4th. I didn't hear about it until 6 o'clock that night because I wasn't in town. And they popped this picture up on the screen. Actually, 2 pictures, one of Fred Hampton and one of Mark Clark. And I was just stunned. I was just staring at the screen, and I realized I was crying.
They shot that place up in ways you couldn't believe. His wife, pregnant, shot up in the bed there. She survived, as did the fetus, but Fred's body was riddled. The walls of the room riddled. I mean, you could count scores of bullet holes there. He never got out of the bed. He was murdered right there. 2:30 in the morning. They claim they're serving a search warrant. Don't we know anything about human rights? You don't serve a search warrant at 2:30 in the morning. You don't come crashing in with guns blazing and kill people asleep in their beds in the United States of America, or do you?
In essence, was an assassination authorized by the FBI, or sanctioned by the FBI.
The Criminal Conspiracy Unit of LAPD, their mission in life was to investigate extremist groups, primarily the Black Panthers. And the FBI had a special unit called the S2 unit. They euphemistically called it their racial squad. Their focus was on the Black Panther Party. So the FBI's racial squad and the LAPD's criminal conspiracy section worked literally hand in hand in bringing down the LA Black Panther Party and its leadership, Pratt in particular.
When Bunchy Carter and John Huggins had been assassinated, Pratt became the leader of the Panthers, and now the FBI had to get rid of Pratt.
Geronimo Pratt was a Vietnam veteran. He'd been a paratrooper and won many medals in Vietnam, including a Purple Heart. He trained all the Panthers in Los Angeles on how to defend the office against attack. He was the defense minister. So he was clearly somebody that the FBI was out to neutralize.
December 8, 1969, Los Angeles, Special Weapons and Tactics, Criminal Conspiracy Section, LAPD, FBI.
The Black Panthers, as we all know, were destroyed as an organization through these illegal FBI operations. And certainly the CIA violated the privacy and the rights of thousands upon thousands of Americans through the illegal operations which they agreed to do under Richard Helms as director.
Any and everything was done to members of the Black Panther Party to destroy not only the Black Panther Party and other organizations, but to demoralize people, to discredit us in the eyes of the people, to criminalize our existence in the consciousness and minds of the people.
It's physical violence and torture, per se. There's nothing modern about it, and there is nothing sophisticated or scientific about it. It is the base against which psychological warfare has its meaning.
We went to interview Dr. Mutulu Shakur, who had cured thousands of drug addicts with the experimental treatment of acupuncture. We found him in an underground prison.
The Black Liberation Movement in 1969 lost something like 43 people were killed, and something like 785 people were arrested and put in prison. In any other country with the population that New African people represent, in any other country in the world, that would be considered war.
We went to interview Mumia Abu-Jamal, the Peabody Award-winning journalist. We found him awaiting execution on death row.
In essence, when one looks at the aims and objectives of the federal government through the FBI, by way of the COINTELPRO program, what one really sees is a war against Black America, a war against in the words of the files, in fact, the emergence of a Black Messiah who could lead Black America.
In 1970, there were tremendous trials. The United States government began to try to sweep up all of the leftovers of the 60s into these major conspiracies. And they had the Black Panther trial, the Chicago 7 trial, the LA 17 trial, the Wilmington 10 trial, RNA 11 trial. There was just tons and tons of these types of trials. Many of our people went to the wayside psychologically, emotionally, and physically.
15-hour shootouts, Philadelphia, New Orleans, Los Angeles, San Diego, the frame up of hundreds of Panthers across the country on ridiculous trumped-up charges.
I was arrested. I was 19 years old. We were the first Waco. The New Bethel incident, when the police came in, the Detroit police came in there to try to shoot up. Everybody in that church, men, women, and children, were having a peaceful demonstration to try to kill them. They were shooting under the pews. They were shooting at little children running and crying.
There's nothing to me has been more painful out of all the people I know that died in Vietnam than those comrades who died out here in the streets. There is nothing.
In 1970, my good friend Julio Rodin of the Young Lords Party was killed in the New York prison called the Tombs.
If they were doing it in Vietnam and it was perfectly legitimate to go out and kill as many Vietnamese as one could, or Viet Cong as one could, then why not kill enemies in the United States?
Today, a judge set Newton free on $50,000 bond to await a new trial.
Newton's last trial and manslaughter conviction were overturned by a higher court this year, so now he'll be tried again. And in the meantime, he is out on bail. He is back on the street. Before Newton got out of prison, the founder of the Black Panther Party sat and talked about his plans for the Panthers now.
I plan to go on with our expansion, and also to make even a stronger tie with the struggling people of the world, because they represent 2/3 of the people.
J. Edgar Hoover today characterized the Black Panthers as the most dangerous and violence-prone of all the extremist groups now active in the United States.
There were forces at foot trying to undermine the relationship between not only myself and the leadership of the Black Panther Party, national leadership, but between the various forces within the Black Panther Party who wanted to make the Black Panther Party more responsive and democratic, and those who wanted to maintain the Black Panther Party as an extension of autocratic control of a Central Committee.
The Central Committee of the Black Panther Party, when I come out of jail, I reorganized it again. Huey and them was actually opposed to this. I says, no, we have to have a broader Central Committee. Because when I come out of jail, Huey was sitting there with him and David. He went to jail, and Elaine Brown and a couple of other people, and saying, this is our Central Committee. And I says, Huey, this whole supreme commander crap has got to go. And these are the private conversations I had with Huey, you know. So my point becomes, he was trying to absolutize himself.
We had felt that all the contradiction that was happening between David Hilliard and all the other people in the party, and the central leadership, and the breakdown in centralism and all of that, would be resolved when Huey came home.
When Huey came out, Geronimo remained a member of the Central Committee.
For whatever reason, Huey, after he got out of jail, he wanted to have the total control of the party, but the way the party was set up with the Central Committee, that was impossible. Geronimo, being one of the strongest personalities on the Central Committee, just had to be eliminated.
It was around this time that Elmer Geronimo Pratt was captured and branded as a agent by David Hilliard and the Central Committee of the Black Panther Party on the West Coast. Of course, this was a total fabrication. Geronimo was not an agent. In fact, the individual who pointed the finger at Geronimo and declared him an agent, Melvin Cotton Smith, was himself a police informer, an agent, who was assigned to Geronimo by David Hilliard.
A split apparently has opened in the leadership of the Black Panther Party. On a San Francisco television talk show, Huey Newton, in the studio, talked with fugitive Eldridge Cleaver, speaking by telephone from Algeria. Cleaver said a purge of Black Panther members is tearing the party apart, blamed it on David Hilliard, and demanded the ouster of Hilliard as Panther Chief of Staff.
Many of those confrontations, both on the West Coast and between the East Coast and the West Coast, happened because of the COINTELPRO program, what they called Program Brown Mail. They would write to one person and sign their letter. They would write to another person and sign each other's person's signature.
And it really cracked the Black Panther Party in two by creating two factions.
All of this was happening at the same time that Huey Newton was planning his itinerary to come back east, and the government used the hysteria and the paranoia around these issues to give Huey the impression that the New York Panthers were unloyal to him.
They wrote to people in my name, signed my signature. And these were crazy letters that were written by the FBI. And Jeff Fort got a letter from Chairman Fred. Of course, they thought those letters were from each other. And the tone of the letters were incendiary. Or you're a punk, If I see you, I'm gonna, shoot you. You're a coward. If you had guts, you would come down here. I mean, it was literally an attempt by this government to incite violence.
COINTELPRO was the whole cause of the split between the different factions in the party that caused the death of Sam Napier.
In terms of the actual physical integrity and well-being of the Panther, Sam Napier might have been the most important person. The newspaper was the most important entity and tool and institution that the Panthers had. And he was in charge of the paper.
The loss of Sam Napier wasn't just the loss of a person who was a paper salesman. It was like a spirit in the party, a strong, positive spirit that permeated the whole party. You lost like a friend, a brother.
Robert Webb was the ranking Panther in the entire East Coast. He had the rank of Field Marshal, which was a Central Committee position. It was an underground secret rank.
The police knew who these people were. The police knew that they had orchestrated this conflict. And they gloated over it in their documents when they said that they could take credit for the murder, for Robert Webb's murder, and that they can take credit for the irreconcilable differences in splitting the Black Panther Party. When Huey Newton came to the Northeast, we in New York were responsible for his security. The government knew this. Through their agents and through the mail, they sent threats, death threats to Huey Newton, purportedly coming from us on the East Coast, saying that, we were faithful to Eldridge Cleaver and that when Huey came back east, we were going to kill him. And it was up at Yale University that Huey Newton sort of like got extremely paranoid. I was told that I was suspended from the Black Panther Party for threatening his life.
So life is very tough, and a funny thing happened to all of us on the way to the grave. Huh?
Huey, David sent me underground with Geronimo, but with no intentions of us being successful, but with the intentions of us eventually being killed. I think their plan was that we would be killed by the police. We would then become martyrs. They would be able to raise us as martyrs and go on with their own program. I followed orders, did what I was supposed to. Geronimo followed orders, did what he was supposed to. And then we end up being in the middle of the split between the Black Panther Party, and they use that as a reason to expel us and to break with Eldridge.
And at the same time that this was going on, the Panther 21 in prison were contemplating writing an open letter criticizing the leadership of the Black Panther Party around various issues.
It was only two things that could happen, that if we could either spend the rest go to prison or the cemetery. And knowing that people like Twyman Myers and Robert Webb and Sam Napier, Fred Bennett, and Fred Hampton had made the ultimate sacrifices, that meant that we could either back up and give up and let them win, or we could struggle against it. On one end, we had the Huey people who were out to do us in, and on the other side, we had the government who was out to kill us. So we were in between the rock and the hard place.
Out of that came the birth of the Underground, the Black Liberation Army, the armed wing of the Black Panther Party, whose stated purpose was to start and initiate an offensive military campaign against the forces of reaction.
BLA came into being when those who did political work above ground, when they were more or less from the repressive forces, was forced underground because of their political work in the community. Then they became part of BLA.
So basically it was taking the war to the enemy instead of waiting the enemy to bring the war to you. And that's what the Black Liberation Army was about.
The public at large has a hard time understanding how often innocent people are wrongly convicted.
The Los Angeles Police Department, the DA's office, and the FBI were determined that Pratt should stay behind bars. And so they tried to find some other case to bring against him. And they finally decided on an unsolved murder case called the tennis court murder that came out of Santa Monica and charged him with this on the basis of some shenanigans involving a FBI informant named Julio Butler.
Julius Butler said at Pratt's trial he was not an FBI informant. We have a ton of material that clearly indicate that Butler was an FBI informant. As an example, here we have an FBI Federal Bureau of Investigation, August 19th, 1969, and all the information he was giving the FBI during that interview.
Of course, the FBI is going to place itself in a position of being able to deny whatever happens, just the way they're denying that Julius Butler was an informant.
Butler said that he has written a letter containing information relating to an involvement of BP members in an affair that could put them in a gas chamber.
I mean, they had an informant file, and Butler was contacted about 36 times, but they said, well, he's not an informant.
Butler said that he was expelled from the BPP in August of 1969. At Pratt's trial, he said he was not expelled, that he quit.
Now, according to FBI's own records, their own telephone tap, they later realized that Geronimo Pratt was in Oakland at the time of the tennis court murder.
The ballistics person came in and testified that the bullet taken from the victim did not match ballistically the barrel of the gun. Well, the way they got around that was they had Julius Butler, as part of his confession, tell the jury that not only did Pratt confess the crime to me, that he did it, but he also told me that he threw the barrel of the gun away. So that took care of that.
The counterintelligence program had successfully divided the Black Panther Party into two opposing groups, and the Newton group had barred any members of its group from having anything to do, speaking on the phone, talking to, and definitely not testifying in trial of the other group. Geronimo Pratt had been expelled. He was in the other group. And so almost all the people who had attended these staff meetings in which he was present, in which I was present, were unable, upon pain of being expelled from the Panther Party, to testify.
This murder, in Geronimo's case, clearly was not Geronimo. Then those government agents need to be brought to justice. And that's the responsibility of people in this country at this point in time.
The FBI's concerted attempt to try to smash the Black Panther Party. They stopped actually attacking us. Didn't mean they didn't have no covert crap going on.
Infiltration of cocaine into the Black Panther Party, its leadership, Huey P. Newton being the main target.
And every once in a while I says, why are you snorting this cocaine? This ain't the thing. Now, I don't say this because I'm trying to destroy Huey's character. What I'm trying to tell people is you have to learn to know the whole truth.
I had clear impression that chemical warfare would be utilized against the Black Panther Party. We had taken a position in our rules against anyone shooting heroin and narcotics found would be immediately dismissed from the Black Panther Party because we essentially were anti-drug in our operations. I'd say in my analysis and reflection and research that there were mind control operations run against the Black Panther Party, as well as a lot of other operations, psychological warfare programs. And when I say chemical warfare, I'm talking about chemical substances like alcohol and cocaine.
MK Ultra was what you might call a research program by the CIA to determine if psychotropic drugs, mind-altering drugs, might be used for intelligence purposes, either for chemical warfare, for the interrogation of intelligence assets, or the neutralization of targets.
See, you have to remember, if you read some of the COINTELPRO documents, they had a psychological profile on Huey, on me, on Eldridge. They knew they could use Huey, and they knew that they could trick Eldridge into a certain level of thinking. So, they had developed this over a period of time. Now, here we got a situation where you got some party members that talk to me that they believe Huey got duped in to, on a small scale level, methodologically destroying the party.
And the party basically went from a people's organization to Huey's private army. That's basically what happened.
It was agreed that I would run for mayor of Oakland, and then Huey insisted that Elaine Brown had to run for city councilwoman at large. We lose the goddamn campaign. And then I found out late May 1974, that Huey was trying to take over the drug trade in Oakland, California. So I said, Huey, the party is over.
The committee will resolve itself into executive session. The room will be cleared and swept.
No director of the National Security Agency has ever before been required by Congress to testify in open session.
There is a great deal about the best intelligence service in the world that we would be proud to tell, to bring into perspective what we have had to say recently about the missteps or misdeeds of the past.
I believe that I could go back over my experiences in the Justice Department and find some areas in which the Bureau is not fully accountable to me. Yes, Senator.
William C. Sullivan, who retired as the FBI's chief investigator 6 years ago after a falling out with J. Edgar Hoover, was killed in a deer hunting accident in New Hampshire today. Sullivan was 65.
Bill Sullivan, who was the number 3 man in the Bureau in charge of Division 5 Domestic Intelligence, expressed extreme remorse to me about his role in suggesting an anonymous letter to Martin Luther King for Dr. King to commit suicide. A week before he was going to be called upon to testify before the House Committee on Assassinations. He was out in a pasture near his New Hampshire home, and he was mistaken, supposedly, for a deer by a young man out hunting, and was killed.
I understand from the news media that the son was an experienced hunter, and I don't know how an experienced hunter could mistake a man who's dressed in a red plaid jacket for the head of a deer. I mean, I have never seen a red deer, but, you know, maybe they're out there somewhere.
But if I could get a virtuous woman,
Who's the boss? Well, in a human society, there aren't really any bosses, but who is the real leader and who is the person whose words are most meaningful to the party as a whole? There isn't any question about it. I mean, it always, that Huey is that person.
I had the distinct impression consistently from 1971 that Ms. Elaine Brown was a highly placed intelligence operative inside the Black Panther Party.
I think Elaine Brown came in through Earl Anthony, and she followed the same course of devious type of activities. So I'm saying all this to say that they got involved with people and caused a lot of problems, but we was aware of it. We just wasn't aware of the extent that the LAPD, the federal government with its COINTEL, the CIA, FBI, we wasn't aware of to the extent that these people were involved.
She acknowledges in her own words, in her book, Taste of Power, that in fact she had been educated, groomed, taught at the hands of a longtime Central Intelligence Agency operative, J. Richard Kennedy, who anyone can find out about in David Garrow's book, The FBI and Dr. Martin Luther King.
So many party members literally have told me they believe this, that this woman was connected some kind of way and got step by step, piece by piece, got Huey hooked over into some notion that he could get more money behind the scene if he step by step methodologically demised the Black Panther Party.
We've always wanted to represent the will of the people. They're not interested in socialism at this time because they believe that they can get their just desserts in this capitalist system. When the people democratically want to change in system to a socialist system, then the party will be the first to have solidarity.
John Stockwell, former station chief of the CIA in Angola, he said, well, I want to say this to you very clear. The Huey P. Newton that people see today is a direct result of operations run by the Central Intelligence Agency to ensure that he would turn out the way that he is.
Some people have a distorted view of me, and it gives me very much trouble. It adds to the sort of timid personality that I already have. It makes me uncomfortable because I know that I can't give them all of those things that their idol is supposed to. And I don't want to appear to them a fake, but I would just like to tell them that, you know, I'm just another regular human being.
Huey P. Newton was never the same. He eventually became Dr. Huey P. Newton, Ph.D. He eventually became a crackhead, and he eventually was assassinated in Oakland in 1989. In the course of our journey, we discovered that certain individuals involved in the demise of the Black Panther Party were also the same individuals who were involved in the demise of the American Indian movement.
It began in 1973 after the Church Committee hearings, when they proclaimed that they were never going to execute covert operations against dissenting organizations. Yet, at the very time they were conducting such an operation against the American Indian movement, a program directed towards the American Indian movement, very similar to the program directed against the Black Panther Party.
The same bag of tricks in each case. You have a very concerted disinformation campaign. You have the insertion of infiltrators and the development of informants. The use of the infiltrators as provocateurs, attempting to convert bona fide activists into provocateurs or disruptive elements within their own organization. They literally would unleash death squads to make sure that the people who were living on the $1,200 a year in the tar paper shack would continue to live on the $1,200 in a tar paper shack.
One of the personnel who were involved in persecuting and later framing Geronimo Pratt was also involved in the fabrication of evidence to convict Leonard Peltier. This was an FBI agent by the name of Richard W. Held.
Well, Richard the Elder, which is Richard G. Held, was basically one of the architects of COINTELPRO.
Strangely enough, both the father and son were involved in the operation on Pine Ridge, which led to the frame-up of Leonard Peltier on murder charges.
Basically the paramilitary operations of 250 to 300 FBI agents, SWAT personnel, on the reservation for about a 3-month period of time to once and for all break the back of the American Indian movement.
Armored personnel carriers with heavy machine guns, M16s wearing camouflage uniforms, overflights by Phantom F-4 reconnaissance jets and Huey helicopters, and remote sensing devices. It was very much like what was deployed in Vietnam at that time.
When the people went into Wounded Knee, there were chiefs and elders and some of the American Indian Movement members. These were the Ogallala people. They didn't have any weapons. They went in there peacefully. They were surrounded with machine guns, armored personnel carriers, so the people picked up arms. And, you know, there were no comparison what the government had. We shot back. It was self-defense.
The government spent nearly $1 billion in the military operation on Pine Ridge. And that's $1 billion in 1975 or 1973 dollars. That's probably more than all the money invested in social programs on that reservation from 1870 onward. A people's movement to control the resources and land on the reservations happened to coincide with the energy crisis. In the Black Hills, there were at least a dozen large multinational corporations, energy corporations involved. And the government purports to represent the people, but it really represents vested economic interests. The movements that are working for positive social change threaten the interests of the transnational corporations, and the government is essentially an instrument of corporate policy.
Leonard Peltier, leader of AIM, the American Indian Movement, had been in jail for 20 years. We finally got permission to interview him. 3 days after we saw him at Leavenworth, he was moved. No one knew where to.
Leonard Peltier is a prisoner of the longest war in the history of the United States. That's the war against the indigenous people of the United States.
And he didn't shoot anybody, and he didn't kill anybody, yet he was convicted because 2 FBI agents had been killed, and somebody had to pay.
The question then becomes, what is he in that cage for? And the answer is to serve as an example of the arbitrary ability of the government of the United States to repress the legitimate aspirations for liberation of Native people, all Native people. He serves that purpose. So long as he's there, even though it's known that he's not guilty of the specific offense which he was convicted.
He's been sentenced to 2 life sentences. But finally they admitted in the last argument of the case in November of 1992 and that they didn't know who shot the 2 FBI agents. They said it several times in different ways without any ambiguity. We don't know who killed the agents. We don't know who fired the fatal shots. And yet here's Leonard Peltier serving these sentences. We're addressing President Clinton to give clemency to Leonard Peltier in the name of simple justice. Now.
The United States Army, of course, has its contingency plans for putting down civil disturbance in the United States. They had these programs in the 1960s called Cable Splicer and Garden Plot for entering onto the scene in the event of civil disturbance in the United States. These activities continued on into the 1980s, but the main agency that became involved on the civilian side was FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency.
The FEMA has created a great deal of paranoia, probably for very good reason. Their whole reason for existence is to take control and keep things going in time of a crisis of earthquake or military crisis. In the instance of a military or political crisis, we don't know what extremes they're willing to go to. They've drawn up their martial law plans.
One of the things that grew out of the military contingency planning, such as Cable Splicer and Garden Plot, was the military assistance to the police forces in organizing these and training these SWAT squads. So these are, in fact, outright militarized police units, even though they are civilian. And the United States military, the Army particularly, had much to do with the establishment of these units through the 1960s and into the 70s. Now, I think all the way across the country there are SWAT units everywhere. And they started out in places like Chicago, I believe, and Los Angeles. But they were done with the help of the U.S. military.
Well, Rex 84 was a plan to draw up to collect dissidents around the country who might be involved in violent activity and throw them basically in detainment camps. Some people call them concentration camps.
They had, I believe, something like 17 military installations selected in the United States, where they would house up to, I believe, something like 150,000 or 250,000 people in the event that the streets turned to chaos if Reagan had invaded Central America in the early 1980s.
So despite what the director of the FBI may be saying currently, you can assume that they're still conducting covert operations.
They were going to round up every dissident and every person who took to the street, plus a lot of foreigners, at the same time, because they did not want to have the situation develop as it had against Johnson and Nixon over the Vietnam War. So in the early 80s, Reagan said all he had to, it was all prepared, the statement declaring martial law, suspending the Constitution, and then they could go out and take everybody over to these military reservations, the equivalent of concentration camps, and just hold them there until what he wanted to do was done.
The government is definitely shifting intelligence resources to the private sector. And one of the reasons for this is to escape public scrutiny under laws such as the Freedom of Information Act. Freedom of Information Act only applies to government agencies.
You have to imagine technology 20, 30 years in advance of what we're using today. All that is classified, and it's classified for a very good reason, because it's being put to criminal uses.
Bugging and interception of private communication, the disappearance of privacy, you might say. What's going on now is that there are large private corporate databases accumulated that accumulate information on individuals, track their activities, track their economic activities. These corporations would call themselves credit corporations or whatever, but they're essentially intelligence operations.
Please listen, my brother and my sister too. Although these lines may not apply to you, we need less killing, less killing, more chilling. We can reach the pinnacle if our mind is willing. Less drinking, more thinking. What the hell is shocking? Our minds, body, spirits, and our bodies is broken. I mean to suggest what the hell is rest, and we can live a little better. I do profess to see the stogie leads to the bottle to the joint. It's a domino effect if you get my point. The joint to the coke to the dope, and you know what? The wake up either dead or broke.
If the ultimate weapon is a bigger subsidy, we will use it. It is worth it. It's worth $50 million this year if that's what it costs to buy a $3 million crop, if it'll do the job. Now, it may be there'll be social problems and the political problems and the rest and their embarrassment that won't do the job. My guess is that $50 million wouldn't do it, but it is worth it to this country. If that will do the job, pay $50 million.
How it is that the United States, with all its military services, the Coast Guard, the CIA, the FBI, the DEA, and cooperating agencies, including local police departments, how they are not able to suppress the drug trade in the United States, how they cannot seal the borders and stop these shipments coming in, and then the whole distribution system. The
nature of the drug use and availability of drugs began to change as the Vietnam War went bad. Specifically, there was a shift from the availability of relatively innocuous drugs like marijuana and hashish on the street to those drugs becoming relatively scarce due to federal drug programs, and there appearing instead a large quantity of a very pure, very cheap heroin.
DEA, FBI, CIA, military, they're all into this international narcotics trafficking. So it doesn't mean that any particular target is only the area of one intelligence agency, because there are all kinds of interagency working groups in which they coordinate their activities directed toward a single target.
The drug trade always supports the government's internal political agenda. It has never not supported the government's internal political agenda. For an example, the phenomena that we saw with the Nicaraguan situation, which we call the Iran-Contra affair, Iran had less to do with the Iran-Contra affair, in our opinion, than Colombia, because it was the Colombian drug pushers which opened up avenues for finance that the United States government could not get legally from the Congress.
Some of the Hmong tribespeople were involved in the production of poppies, and under the CIA, that production greatly increased, and the revenues from the sale of those drugs, which were flown out by CIA proprietary airlines, were used to further finance covert operations by the CIA.
So what the United States government did was to get the ready cash through Elliott Abrams that allowed drugs, cocaine, to come into these poor communities all over the country as a means to then serve the secondary agenda, which is to sedate and control and criminalize as many of those black and Latin people that they can.
One of the effects is to take totally out of the political picture a whole generation or two of young black males who either get involved in the drug trade and end up in prison, or who get involved in consumption and do not get involved in politics.
It's the state that builds the archipelago of prisons. It's the state that invents a rhetoric of 3 strikes and you're out. It's the state that invents a vocabulary that is soaked in crime, which is meant to describe the lives of young people, adolescents, basically.
I've spent 19 years in prison in the United States for my political beliefs. You were the symbol that helped sustain me and other African-American political prisoners. I say to you, brother, we love you and we will not give up the fight. We will not give up the fight. We will not give up the fight. We will not give up the fight.
I think we've had political prisoners in the United States for a very long time. On an official level, they would not admit this.
Of course there are political prisoners in the United States, even if the U.S. government will never admit to them. Political prisoners are the heartbeat of the struggle, reminders of what the struggle is really about. They have been behind the wall now 15, 20, and going on 25 years. They must not be forgotten.
So while I'm sitting here in prison today with 115 witnesses, 532 exhibits, electronic surveillance, electronic eavesdropping, no fingerprints, no blood, no weapon, no words, nothing ever said against me. But I'm convicted.
To this date, at least 800 pages of COINTELPRO and ADEX, or agitator index files, have been released to my lawyers in my name. Of course, thousands have not been. They're still classified.
We believe that the Congressional Black Caucus should have a hearing to determine the effect of COINTELPRO on the new African independence movement, the Black liberation movement, like they did to the left. That the parties responsible must admit they're wrong in those attacks of violation of those people's constitutional rights. It will then set a tone of reconciliation.
A single stone or a grain of sand, as we are each individuals, if we change ourselves, if we do one small thing, it's much better than people trying to do big things and for their self-aggrandizement.
Government and the system, the industrial forces that are a plague on Mother Earth, that are destroying the water, the air, the earth itself, the genetic material within us all. It it isn't just destroying it for people in Africa or people in Southeast Asia or people in Latin America. It's destroying it for every being on Earth. And I mean every being. I don't mean every man, woman, and child. I mean every living entity.
All through history, no matter how much power has surged through totalitarian, through empires, rulers, and conquerors, whether they be governments or individuals as dictators or despots or tyrants, history has always shown that the human spirit will always prevail.
We do not exist as individuals. All of us have a mother and a father. So we come from a collectivity of these two beings. We cannot ignore that and say, well, I am. There is no I am. There is only we are. We are collective. All of us breathe the same air. We share the same sunlight. The feelings that I have in my heart are feelings that you have in your heart. We share spiritual vibrations.
Love is natural. Hate is unnatural. Hate breeds hate. So what, you know, but I have never known where you have overcome hate with hate, but you can overcome hate with love and respect.
I'll just say it in the words of Bob Marley. Stand up for your rights. Don't let anybody tell you what you can and you cannot do. You can organize, you can educate, you can make a difference.
We have to learn how to sit down and talk with each other first. Until we can sit down and speak with each other, sit down as men and women, sit across from each other and break bread, and to learn that we're human beings. I don't care, you know, how low you are considered in poverty, or what nationality, or how rich you are. Until we can learn to sit down with each other and discuss the problems, we're not going to be able to accomplish that.
Revolution is, first of all, change, personal transformation. Revolution is not a word to be afraid of, because revolution is ultimately the most natural thing in the universe. Revolution is speaking truth to power. It is people recognizing their historical identity and their future duty and necessity to transform this reality into a better reality.
I just want to be sure that everyone knows that I still have the fire in the belly, that I'll do what I can to be as productive from here as I can, that I have legal cases that will put these issues in the public record, and we will continue to share that with whoever, and that the international community should know that the New African Independence struggle and the struggle for justice is live and well. It's dormant, but here comes the wind. Free Mamiya.
At the end of this journey, let us look inside our hearts with forgiveness, remembering not only the past and all those whose lives were sacrificed to violence, but let us also examine how we are going to survive together as humanity into the future, with peace and justice for all.